Good morning. It is August 5th, and I am joined today by the Lieutenant Governor, Garland Gilchrist, Dr. Janae Caldoun, our Chief Medical Executive, and Flint Mayor Sheldon Neely. So I want to start today by talking about Michigan State Police Trooper Caleb Starr, who passed away after he was struck by a drunk driver on July 10th. Trooper Starr joined the Michigan State Police in September of 2018 as a member of the 135th Trooper Recruit School. He was 33 years old. I want to offer my sincerest condolences to his wife, Rachel, and their two little girls. And I want to remind all Michiganders to stay safe on the roads. You know, it's been nearly 5 months since the first cases of COVID-19 hit our state. 5 months, and we still don't have a comprehensive national strategy from the federal government. We don't have a federal mask mandate or a widespread testing plan. And the federal government has not yet agreed on a recovery plan to help the states and locals mitigate the unprecedented impact that this virus has had. Yesterday, we announced that President Trump has granted my request that he authorize the use of the Michigan National Guard forces for COVID-19 response through December 31st of 2020. And for that, we are grateful. I do think it's worthy of note, however, that the President decided to fully fund the National Guard activities in 2 other states, while the rest of us are funded at 75%. The states of Florida and Texas have been determined to be funded at 100%. It's unfortunate that this is the case because every one of us is confronting COVID-19. The rest of the states who've got to operate at 75% will have to make some hard choices about whether to continue National Guard missions for testing, disinfecting public spaces, distributing food, and more. This is yet one more reason that we need direct funding to the states for the next recovery, in the next recovery package. Michigan and states across the country need the federal government to step up so that we can continue providing critical services and protecting families and businesses from COVID-19. It's time for the President and Congress to work together in a bipartisan way to pass the recovery package to support state governments, families, frontline workers, and small business owners. People across the country are counting on the federal government to put partisanship and games aside and start working together for the benefit of all Americans. And here's what we need: aid to state and local governments so we can continue providing critical services to families. States across the country are struggling because of unprecedented impact that this crisis has had on our budgets. We also need extension of pandemic unemployment benefits so that working families can pay for things like rent and utility bills. We need an increase in SNAP benefits because nobody should have to worry about how they're going to put food on the table during a global pandemic. We need funding for child care to help our crucial frontline workers who put their lives on the line every single day to take care of us so that their kids can be taken care of. We need an extension on the federal student loan payment and interest freeze past September so that we can give borrowers additional relief from while the economy recovers. We need an increase and extension of the FMAP so that federal government covers a greater share of Medicaid costs. And we need aid that helps and starts with funding our K-12 schools and higher education institutions without insisting that schools open even if it's not safe. After delaying action for months, Senator McConnell and the Senate Republicans released a proposal last week that fails to meet the scale of the crisis we confront. Unlike the House-passed HEROES Act, McConnell's plan guts benefits for millions of Americans and puts our economic recovery more out of reach. With more than 25 million people out of work and unemployment claims on the rise for the second week in a row, now is not the time to slash benefits that have been a lifeline for so many Americans. People all across our country are struggling with the need for real help to pull the rug out from under them right now, while we're still very much in the midst of the public health crisis and economic recession, doesn't make any sense. Republicans need to drop this plan and join Democrats in a bipartisan way and construct a comprehensive stimulus package that meets the need of everyday Americans. We need leaders who are going to work together to help families and frontline workers and small business owners. Nobody has time for election year partisan games when lives are on the line. This is a crisis and we need bipartisan action right now. So today I'm joined by leaders from across the state to announce a series of new initiatives to prevent discrimination and racial inequity in Michigan. Since I was sworn in as governor, I've made it a top priority of mine and my administration's to include more people of color, more women, more members of the LGBTQ plus community, more people who are representative of the socioeconomic classes in Michigan and the geographic areas in Michigan at the table, in not a tokenism way, but in an empowered way. We've been able to build a more inclusive state government, but there certainly is more work to do. Today I signed an executive order to create the Black Leadership Advisory Council of Michigan, which I will work closely with to develop our policies and paths to opportunity for Black Michiganders. I want to thank Senator Erica Geis, who sponsored the original legislation, for her leadership. This is the first advisory council of its kind, focusing on African American issues in Michigan. And I'm proud to work closely with leaders like those here today to build a more just and equitable state. The deadline to apply for the council is 5 p.m. Wednesday, August 19th. And the link to apply is michigan.gov/appointments. And candidates should select Black Leaders Advisory Council from the drop menu on the application. Today, I also signed an executive directive declaring racism as a public health crisis in Michigan. I want to thank the Michigan Legislative Black Council for their leadership. This pandemic has confirmed and highlighted the deadly nature of these pre-existing inequities caused by systemic racism. COVID-19 is more than 4 times as likely to take the life of a Black Michigander than a white one. And this reflects long-standing, deep societal, economic, and environmental disparities. This executive directive directs MDHHS to work with other state departments to examine data, develop and plan policies, engage, communicate, and advocate for communities of color. Dr. Khaldun will also touch on further steps the department will take to address systemic racism in Michigan. I want to thank Dr. Khaldun for her leadership. She's the reason Michigan was one of the first 3 states to release demographic data so that we could help better act to protect people in our state. DHHS is the largest state department that touches the most citizens in our state, and so her work is crucial, and the work that Director Robert Gordon is doing as well. They'll work around the clock to help us reach our goals. Now, I know how important it is for state government to lead by example, which is why I've directed that all state employees be required to take implicit bias training, including myself and our entire executive office. Implicit bias is simply an unconscious preference that exists in each one of us. And as public servants, we have a duty to understand how those tendencies impact our actions on the lives of others. The training is required for both existing employees and must be completed within 60 days for newly hired employees. This is not alleging that people are racist. It's recognizing that everyone has biases from where we grew up or how we were raised. It's just a fact, and that's why we've got to acknowledge it and seek to address it. We have a lot of work to do to eradicate the systemic racism that Black Americans have faced for generations. And it's going to take time. But the most important thing we can do during this time is work closely with leaders across the state in every community to find the root cause of problems and work to eradicate them. This group will continue to keep an open dialogue as we work toward our goal of ensuring that we build a stronger Michigan where everyone, no matter what community they're from, has a real opportunity. And with that, I want to introduce the Lieutenant Governor, Garland Gilchrist, Chair of the COVID-19 Task Force on Racial Disparities, to talk a little bit more about the work that they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. And good morning, everyone. I would like to also acknowledge Dr. Jonae Caldoon and Flint Mayor Sheldon Neely, who you'll be hearing from in a few moments. I, too, want to express my deepest condolences to the family of Trooper Caleb Starr. The entire state of Michigan is feeling this tragic loss, and he will be missed by all of his colleagues in the Michigan State Police. We thank him and all of you for your service. These past several months have been very difficult for all of us as we have dealt with this virus that moves quickly and silently. It has been tough for the families who've lost loved ones to this devastating virus, and I count myself among those, losing 23 people in my life to COVID-19. It's been tough for the frontline workers who have faced great uncertainty as they showed up to work to keep vital, life-sustaining services operating. I saw this firsthand yesterday when I went to get tested out of an abundance of caution when one of our sitting state senators in the legislature tested positive for COVID-19. And I pray for his recovery. And I pray that everyone who may have even feared they've been in contact with someone gets tested. Thankfully, my results did come back negative. But I encourage every person again to get tested, and you can find the nearest testing location at michigan.gov/coronavirus test. It's been really difficult for our children who've basically had to relearn how to learn, taking classes online, who haven't seen their friends or classmates or even some family members in months. And again, I feel this personally with my twin 6-year-olds and my baby girl, Ruby. This has been really difficult for employees who've had to work differently, or for those who haven't been able to work because their workplaces have had to pause operations in the name of public health and public safety. But if you're a black person in Michigan, or if you're a person of color in our state, the pandemic has been even more difficult in all of these cases. You see, we know that coronavirus itself doesn't discriminate, but it literally feeds upon the discriminatory inequities that exist in our system. This pandemic has held a mirror up to our entire country's healthcare system, and we've seen that communities of color are suffering at higher rates in part because of a lack of attachment to that healthcare system. In our state, we've still had about 40% of our deaths be black residents from coronavirus, but our population is merely 14%. In addition to being more likely to work in one of those jobs that is really risky in the context of the pandemic, but critical and needing to function, black and brown employees have been more likely to be laid off or to have their hours reduced. A report from the University of Michigan actually found that nearly half of black Detroiters and a third of Latino Detroiters say they have lost their jobs due to this pandemic. And we all know too well that businesses owned by black and other people of color entrepreneurs have been more likely to have had to close down and less likely to receive government assistance, especially from the federal government, that the assistance that they would need to keep the paychecks flowing, to keep people on their payrolls, and to not close their operations and continue to be the anchors that they are in the communities. While these injustices in our country, frankly, have been exacerbated and intensified by coronavirus, they are as old as America itself. They're the same inequities that after the killings of George Floyd and so many others have motivated Americans from every background and identity to confront the legacy of systemic racism that has been a stain on our nation for centuries. That is why we're saying what should have been said long ago. Racism is a public health crisis. However, it is not enough to simply label an injustice. We have to actively take steps to replace injustice with justice. This formal declaration from our administration creates the space for state departments and agencies to specifically examine, respond to, and coordinate all of our policies and programs to quickly and substantively put Michigan on a path to address these issues head on. The governor mentioned signing an executive order creating the Black Leadership Advisory Council. This will be a leading pillar of this effort to lay a new foundation of equity and inclusion in Michigan. The Black Leadership Advisory Council is among a set of diverse ethnic commissions within the state of Michigan's government. This council will include at least one person between the age of 18 and 35 to bring the experiences of our young Michiganders. The council will also include at least one person who is an immigrant or has experience on immigration policy. See, Black folks, we are the largest racial minority in the state, but this council, as the governor alluded to, is the first of its kind in Michigan that will elevate and engage Black leaders and our representatives. It will build upon the work that we've begun with the Michigan Coronavirus Task Force on Racial Disparities. And it will expand the scope of that work to develop policies to address disparities in health, create generational economic opportunity, lead to community investment, provide access to affordable and available housing, increase public safety in the truest sense, make investments in education, environmental justice, and broadly create more opportunities for Black Michiganders to pursue happiness and success. When we have full and complete representation, we have policies and programs that can address people's full and complete concerns. We are one of the first states, and still, unfortunately, to this day, one of just a few states who are actually tracking and reporting our cases of coronavirus and COVID-19 deaths by race and ethnicity. We're the first administration to join our neighbors in the March for Justice as we marched down Woodward in Detroit after the murder of George Floyd. I was also proud to join protesters on the west side of Detroit at Dexter and Davison. We were the first state to form a task force to specifically and explicitly apply the full force of state government to address the racial disparities that we have seen during this pandemic and how they connect to longer-term health disparities. And we were the first administration to require implicit bias training in state government and in medical professional licensure processes. So just as we've used data and science and evidence to drive action during this crisis, we will use data and science and evidence to act on equity and inclusion. The state will begin examining this data to document the differences in health outcomes among racial and ethnic groups in Michigan and how it must be collected, analyzed, and made publicly available to help leaders implement equitable policies. This will help departments better understand how racial disparities in societal, environmental, and behavioral factors intersect to affect resources like good jobs, access to healthy and affordable food and housing, equitable transportation options, quality public education, and opportunities for diverse entrepreneurs. The Equity Impact Assessment Tool, which I'm frankly very excited about, that Dr. Caldoun will speak to, is another thing that we're introducing. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services has launched this tool to further address implicit bias and how we can make sure that equity is centered in the choices that we make as state government. This will use data, community engagement, and analysis as a way to make sure the policies and the practices within the department are providing the best services in mitigating inequities and disparities. If we are going to design a new system that works for everyone, we need to ensure that everyone has a seat at the table. That is why we're putting out this call to action today for people to step up and lend their voices and experiences to building a better Michigan. You can start by applying for the Black Leadership Advisory Council. I want to second that and go to michigan.gov/appointments to do so. Those of us in positions of power and leadership at any level have a responsibility to use the tools at our disposal to put everyone's success within their reach. The actions that we're announcing today are another step toward this administration fulfilling that responsibility. Now, I'd like to close today with the words of James Baldwin, whose birthday recently passed. See, James Baldwin said that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Neither I nor this administration will turn our faces away from injustice when we have the opportunity and the power to right it. And with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jonay Caldoun here to the podium for an update. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Lieutenant Governor and Governor. So I'm proud to stand with Governor Whitmer, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, and Mayor Neely today to declare racism a public health crisis. As has been discussed many times, communities of color are disproportionately impacted by many health conditions, whether it's cancer mortality, heart disease, diabetes, maternal mortality, infant mortality, and now COVID-19. The statistics are staggering, and we must do better. And let's be clear, these disparities have nothing to do with genetics and race. They are due to unequal treatment and racism that have plagued our society for centuries. But I'm encouraged because there is something that we can do about it. Declaring racism as a public health crisis means that we will and must tackle this with urgency and intention. I'm excited about the steps that the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services is taking under the leadership and commitment of Director Robert Gordon, but also the expertise and dedication of the department's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council that has been championing this work for years. One of the things we're doing is expanding the application of a decision-making process throughout the department that will work to decrease systematic disparities and inequities in marginalized populations. This tool is called an Equity Impact Assessment, and it provides a concrete, organized, and objective way of assessing processes, budget allocations, policies, and programs with an equity lens. We know that inequities created and perpetuated by programs are sometimes unintentional, and they're embedded into historical government systems and processes. And the Equity Impact Assessment will guide MDHHS leaders to think through implications of their decisions on minority populations and will absolutely help reduce disparities and inequities. We're going to start with the Department of Health and Human Services, but then also work with other departments and agencies on implementation of this tool. So I'm excited because this is something that is concrete and it will drive change, and I'm proud of our department for leading these efforts. So let's talk about COVID-19 and where we stand in the state. Yesterday, we announced 84,050 cases and 6,220 total deaths in Michigan. Overall, we are seeing a plateau in cases after a slight uptick in June and July. And as we have seen throughout this pandemic, the disease spread looks different by region. I'm going to go through that now. So the Detroit, Grand Rapids, and Kalamazoo regions have just over 40 cases per million people per day and have seen a steady decrease over the past 2 to 3 weeks. The Jackson and Upper Peninsula regions both have about 35 cases per million people per day and have also seen decreases over the past 1 to 2 weeks. The Saginaw region has just under 30 cases per million people per day and has seen a decrease over the past week. And the Lansing region also has just under 30 cases per million people per day, but they have seen a 2-week increase in their rate of cases as well. The Traverse City region is currently the only region of the state that has under 10 cases per million people per day, and they continue to see a decrease over the past 3 weeks. We also continue to focus on our testing. So we are now holding steady at about 28,000 tests per day, and that's about 2% of our population per week that is getting a test. And the good news is that our percent of tests that are positive is also now trending down. It's at 3.4%, down from 3.7% the previous week. Our hospitalizations and deaths continue to remain steady and low, particularly the deaths. These are all good signs, and we will continue to monitor these metrics. But as we all know, even if a trend is stabilizing, it only takes a few people to create an outbreak and have the disease spread rapidly. So these plateauing trends are not reasons to let our guard down. There's still disease spread across the state, and we're still seeing several outbreaks across the state in every region. So last week, our local health departments identified 99 new outbreaks that they were investigating, and that's an increase from the 78 new outbreaks that they had the previous week. These outbreaks continue to occur in a variety of settings. The top categories for outbreaks are our skilled nursing facilities and other long-term care facilities, social gatherings, and schools. And it includes colleges, child care centers, and day camps. So we still have to keep fighting this disease that's still very present across the state. We're seeing way too many outbreaks, and our cases are not yet low enough to think that we can let our guard down even for a moment. So that means the basics. Again, wearing masks, washing hands, maintaining 6 feet of distance between yourself and others really remain the best thing that you can do to protect yourself and the community. And please know that even though our recent numbers of deaths are low, we're still learning every day about new research on the long-term health impacts of COVID-19. So this means anyone, including young people, can have long-term lung, brain, and heart damage. So please do not think that you are invincible. Testing continues to be incredibly important. So if you work outside the home, if you're sick, or if you've been exposed to someone who has been sick, please go and get a test. You can go to our website, www.michigan.gov/coronavirus test, or you can call 211 and someone will help you identify a site. We have over 300 testing sites across the state. And I will continue to remind you, please answer the phone if someone from a health department calls you or now sends you a text message. We have been able to successfully reach out to 97% of contacts of positive cases within 24 hours, but only 47% of those calls are actually being completed. So this means that people are still not answering their phones, or we might have a wrong phone number. Please do your part. Speak to us if we call you. It is one of the most important things that we can all do to keep disease spread as low as possible. So we've come a long way since the spring, but we still have much work to do if we're going to keep disease spread down and get our kids back to school in the fall. Thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Mayor Neely.
Good morning, and thank you, Dr. Calhoun, and also Lieutenant Governor Garland-Gilchrist, and also Governor Gretchen Whitmer. You know, I also want to lend my support and prayers to the Starr family, lost trooper. It's definitely difficult times in our community when we lose a true community patriot and also an officer. So we, from the community of Flint, will also extend our prayers to the family. And being a strong man of faith, I've always been taught that praise is an act of your actions. Praise is an act of your actions. And today's actions by Governor Whitmer deserves praise. Being the former legislative Black Caucus chairman and also mayor of a black community, I do understand the disparities and what we have to overcome as a community and also as a state. And I am so proud of this governor and the lieutenant governor and this administration and the state of Michigan for making these bold moves and really showing what leadership is all about. The world can take a snapshot of what's being done here today to really talk about the level of equality. Equality is only a word unless it's met with unity and goodwill. And this administration is showing both unity and goodwill. The disparities that Dr. Calhoun talked about, infant mortality, maternal mortality, environmental injustices, disparate treatment by law enforcement. We're going to get beyond that, and it starts today in the state of Michigan. And I am so proud to be asked to be here to speak to this. I'm so proud of our governor. I'm so proud of our lieutenant governor to take these steps to move our communities forward. This is a wonderful day in Michigan. But I encourage all of you to be a part of the change, to be a part of equality, to be a part of unity, and to meet it with goodwill. So thank you, Governor Whitmer. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Garland-Gilchrist. And thank you, Dr. Calhoun, for all the benefits that Michiganders are going to benefit moving forward. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Mayor Neely. Doing important and strong job in the city of Flint. So thank you for being here. Appreciate your leadership. All right, with that, this is a new one. We are taking questions from the press. They are via Zoom call because we wanted to make sure we keep everyone safe as we adhere to the new rules about indoor gatherings across the state. So we only have 10 people in this room, and so the press has had to Zoom in. So with that, I'd be happy to open it up for a few questions.
Governor, the first question will come from Eric Lloyd.
Hello, Governor. Now, despite the Traverse City region being so far ahead of others in numbers of cases, some restrictions were tightened last week. You said you wanted to nip this in the bud before school begins. So does that mean we can expect it not to see any changes or loosening of restrictions until school begins, especially coming up the Labor Day weekend, no matter positive changes in the numbers?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question, Eric. I think that it's really important that we stay focused on the fact that this virus still doesn't show up in numbers until a couple of weeks later. It's the dangerous, insidious thing about COVID-19 is that you can be carrying it and not even know it. I mean, they say, 30% of the population, that's probably true for. Is that an accurate number? I mean, we're learning a lot about this virus. So conventional wisdom is now, though, that maybe a third of the people who have it don't even know they have it. And that's why you don't see the numbers in terms of the positivity cases until a few weeks later, and then a few weeks later seeing the hospitalizations. So we know that our actions today are going to dictate whether or not we are in a strong position to safely resume some in-person instruction this fall. If you look around the world at what's happened in countries that have resumed in-person instruction, the countries that have done so successfully are the ones where they've seen their numbers continuously declining. Well, as Dr. J just explained, we are at a plateau, essentially. Countries that have been successful have less than 10 per million per day. We are well above that all across the state of Michigan right now, and that's why it's really important that we tighten up where we can. We're trying to avoid moving back a phase. That's something that I'm hopeful we can prevent from happening. But it's all going to be dictated by what people do. And we will see it in the numbers in the next week, the next 2 weeks, the next 3 weeks. If people are serious about masking up and washing their hands and not congregating, it's going to be really important. Eric, I'll be up in your part of the state to memorialize former Governor Bill Milliken, who was our state's longest serving governor. And we are very strictly observing the executive order when it comes to gatherings. And it's because every one of us has to do our part. So can I tell you with certainty that there will be no more changes for the next 3 weeks? No, of course I cannot. Because what will drive all the decision making will continue to be the epidemiology and the public health needs all across Michigan, and of course our goal of keeping the economy engaged and getting our kids back in school.
The next question will come from Rod from Channel 4.
Yes, hi, Governor. The question about the mask mandate, your enforcement mandate, are you seeing enough results? And can you discuss the enforcement measures that are in place and whether you think that this can get contentious and how you prevent it from getting there?
So I appreciate the nature of the question. I know that every time we issue an executive order, people want to immediately go to enforcement and the punitive nature. But I think what's really important is that these executive orders are about trying to increase compliance with what the scientists and public health experts are telling us are the best practices. It's about increasing compliance. It's not focused on punishing those who don't. It's about increasing the knowledge, the understanding, and really trying to change the culture. I'm grateful that President Trump has worn a mask. I am glad to see people on both sides of the aisle starting to advocate masks because we've got to get the politics out of this. Now is a time for us to band together. It has been said we are at war with a virus. It's important that we act like we're in war, that we lock arms from a distance and all do what we need to win this war. And it's just as simple as a face covering remains the best tool we have to be successful. There's still no cure. They're making strides on vaccines, but there's not a vaccine yet. And even if we get to a point where there's a vaccine, when we get to a point that there's a vaccine, it's going to take time to produce it en masse so that there are quantities available for people all across the country and around the globe. And so that's why we're focusing on changing the culture so that people understand masking has got to be a part of our way of life for a while. We do have some flagrant violations, and that is why I've got an executive directive to all the departments of the state to make this a priority. I know that the vast majority of businesses are trying to do the right thing. We've seen increased compliance in our retail spaces and in our grocery stores, and that's what we're really going for. It's not about punishing people, it's about protecting people.
The next question will come from Christina Ford.
Governor, how comfortable are you with the return to learn plans you've been seeing? Many are going with hybrid plans, and I've seen at least one district who's going to be going in person full time.
So right now we are in phase 4 in the majority of the state. We're in phase 5 in 2 regions of our state, and that would permit some in-person instruction. Because we have so many districts across the state of Michigan, it was important for us to give kind of the guardrails about what is going to be expected in particular phases of the My Safe Start plan. In phase 4, in-person is permitted, but there are a lot of protocols and requirements to keep students safe. This is a decision that has to be made at the local level, though, because in Lansing, I can't tell you precisely what the individual assets and challenges are of all these hundreds of districts that we have. That's why the school board is there, and that's why the superintendents are there. And it's also why it's so important that parents are educated and engaged on the making of these plans, as well as our teachers and bus drivers and all of the educational workforce. This is about all of us, and we got to get it right. Now, my daughter goes to East Lansing. She's been informed that she will be learning from home, at least for the beginning of the term, perhaps longer, we will see. We know that the Lansing region is in phase 4. We, as Dr. Caldoun just described, we are seeing our numbers have an uptick in the last couple of weeks, and so the Lansing School District has decided not to resume in person to be at distance. These are decisions that have to be made at that level. Now, we have given the guardrails, and if we move back a phase, they will have to deploy their distance learning plans. But this is, I think, a source of consternation for all of us. Parents like me, leaders like me, as well as the mom and dad who are just simply trying to make sure their kid gets the education they need and that they can work so they can put food on the table. We're going to have to be nimble. And it's frustrating, and it's hard to hear that. But that's the nature of this virus. And that's why it's critical that we're masking up. That's why I think you see other states doing what we have done by getting aggressive and taking positions so that we can strengthen the likelihood that we can resume and safely do so.
The next question will come from Riley at Bridge.
Hi, Governor. How do you feel about how things went with the primary election yesterday? And do you think there need to be any policy changes ahead of the November election to handle a potential influx of absentee ballots?
Yeah, thanks, Riley. So I chatted with our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, yesterday. I know that they've been doing an incredible amount of work, and certainly our local clerks have been working their tails off to try to make this a successful election. We're in the midst of a global pandemic, and so availing ourselves of the ability to vote from home is the safest way to make sure that you can participate in this important responsibility that we all should assume we're going to undertake as Americans. And so I encourage anyone who's watching to go online right now and reserve your ballot, request your ballot for fall so that you can vote from home. And as soon as you get it, vote and send it in, because we want to make sure that every vote gets counted and more people vote. But in order for us to produce an accurate count as quickly as possible, I do think that it merits some changes. And I am glad that the Secretary of State indicated the Senate Majority Leader is open to taking some of these, and that the Speaker of the House appears to be as well, for at least my understanding. I'm eager to work with them to give our local clerks the ability to do some of the processing, not counting, but processing earlier on so that we can get a count closer to when the polls close. And I think that there are perhaps some additional reforms that we might want to undertake. But having this vote yesterday, learning the lessons from it, and quickly adapting our system so that we are smarter and we can produce an accurate count quick is something that I think is important, and I hope it's important to everyone in the legislature too.
The next question will come from Mackenzie Frost.
Hi, Governor. You're mentioning the plateau, and I'm just wondering, how long does the state need to stay in this plateau of new cases before you're willing to loosen some of these restrictions, especially as we get a little bit closer to school?
Well, I'm going to ask Dr. J to step in and chat a little with you about that. But first, I'll say this. You know, this plateau at this rate is not, it's better than an increase, but what we want to see is a decrease over the course of a couple of weeks. And I think, you know, the fact that we've staved off what we saw to be a very concerning increase that's positive. But now is no time to spike the football. This is still concerning in terms of the number of positive cases that we're seeing. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Khaldun.
Thank you. So that's right. What you want to see is not just a plateau, but also a decrease in cases. And if there is going to be a plateau, it's a plateau that's very low. So ideally, we would want it to be under 10 cases per million people per day, and a trend that continues in that way. Again, we're also looking at other data. We're looking at percent positivity. We want it to be at least below 3%, and ideally much lower than 3%. But we want that trend to also maintain for some time. Again, we're also watching our hospitalizations, we're watching our deaths, we're making sure our testing capacity is what it needs to be. So there are many things that we're looking at to determine how we move forward with the phases across the state.
Governor, the last question will come from Chad Livengood.
Governor, given that Michigan State is encouraging students not to come to campus, or basically not to come to East Lansing, do you want to see the universities, public universities, come together and basically formulate a policy on their own to try to keep as many kids out of college towns this fall?
So, Chad, I'm going to answer that wearing two hats. One is the mother of a rising freshman at one of our universities, and as the governor of the state of Michigan, we know that where we are seeing increases, very concerning increases, are amongst the age group that you are describing. We also know that college campuses are places where people love to congregate, whether it's in the Greek system, or it is in a dorm, or it is in a bar, depending on the age of the students, of course. And this makes it uniquely susceptible to COVID outbreak. So we're very concerned about it. And I was pleased to see that Dr. Stanley made that policy decision at Michigan State University. He is, by profession an epidemiologist, so I know that, the fact that our three, largest universities, Wayne State, U of M, and MSU, are led by people who are men of science, I think gives me some comfort here. But I do think that it's important that this is an evolving conversation, as our knowledge of this virus is always evolving as well. And so that is something that I think would be beneficial to their students, their faculty, all of the workforce on our campuses. And so that is, I think, something that would be very helpful, and I'm encouraging them to do that.
Thank you, Governor.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Mask up, Michigan. Stay safe. Take care.